Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana walked slowly down the street, deeply and eagerly, breathing in the first gusts of the light spring breeze. The wind, as if rejoicing with the girl, played merrily with her golden brown curls, each time caressing her pale, gaunt young face. At last, thought the girl, I can't believe it. I can breathe freely again, walk freely, and no longer need to go to bed after bedtime. This is the greatest happiness of man, freedom. Adriana had the right to say that because she had been released from prison only a few days ago. Adriana was lucky, having served 3 years out of 5. Adriana was under the amnesty program and received a legal pardon. However, despite this, it was very hard for the girl, especially at first. Constant intimidation and indecent proposals from the side, their exorbitantly accurate escort named James, made Adriana's life on the zone almost unbearable. Every now and then James caught up with Adriana, from the morning roll call in the yard of the colony to the shrill signal of the end of the work shift in the local sewing shop. The man, like a mountain, piled all his fat on the small, fragile Adriana, and pressing her as hard as he could against the dirty wall, so that the girl could not move, began to whisper passionately in her ear. Adriana, don't be silly. What do you care? Would it be a waste of you? The escort's hands, meanwhile, shamelessly tried to feel the girl's legs. James' thick, sticky fingers were trying to get under the edge of Adriana's tight, dark blue work skirt. The young prisoner, realizing that she could not escape from the clutches of this beast, crossed her sharp knees and turned her face to the wall. Sometimes Adriana felt as if he would crush her, or that she would accidentally break her neck, trying to dodge his disgusting, slobbering kisses. I've had my eye on you for a long time, since day one. The huge man continued to confess his feelings. James was only 32, but because of a lot of extra weight, he looked much older and unpleasant. You see such a beautiful girl, but in our hole. Come on, say something. At least give me a word of affection. Adriana persisted in her silence until James's patience began to fray at the seams. You shouldn't. You're wasting your breath, girl. His lustful moans became more and more filled with unkind growls. Do you think you're special or something? You think you're going to get hit on just because you have a pretty face. I'll have you in the SHU, you little bitch. You'll be eating out of the same bowl as the cockroaches. You'll do all your time from call to call. No parole for you, you understand me? Finally, Adriana looked at him in her indifferent, light green eyes. There was nothing but contempt and absolute steadfastness in her own convictions. It's up to you, guard, Adriana said calmly. But it is better to sleep with cockroaches and to choke on breadcrumbs instead of porridge than to lie in the same bed with you, Mr. James. The guardsman's cheeks began to shape like jelly in an open can of stew, and the lumpy, uneven skin on his face was covered with red spots. James pounded the girl with his huge fist under her breath and hissed angrily as Adriana tried to suck in air noisily, at the same time bending in half from the pain that pierced her stomach and chest. Bold, huh? But nothing. We'll see how soon you sing differently when I send the right people to you. Look, Adriana, look at me. James forcefully grabbed Adriana by the hair and jerked her head up, forcing her to look directly into his hateful, almost colorless eyes. A triumphant smile played on his lips, thin and scarlet like earthworms. I'm going to break you, you slaughtered goat. You'll be begging for mercy when I come to you in the evenings. But I'm not going to stop, no. We're going to have a lot of fun, believe me. James stuck out his long, thick tongue and swiped it across the girl's neck, so that Adriana wanted to scream in the sense of disgust and humiliation. Unfortunately, Adriana realized that her screams and attempts to draw the attention of her superiors to the situation might not serve her well, making her situation in the colony worse. Instead, she bit her knuckles with all her might and sobbed silently, putting all her resentment and pain into those choking sounds. The next few weeks, the girl had to spend in unaccountable fear for her life. Adriana forever remembered what it tasted like, this terrible feeling, when instead of falling into a deep and empty sleep, after a hard shift at work, she was forced to be on guard all the time. Every now and then, listening to every suspicious rustle that came from her cellmates. James, of course, did not stop all this time to mock the girl, then forced the prison cook to put a couple of nails in her liquid porridge at lunch for a sweet, as the disgusting guard later put it, then constantly watched for the slightest violation of the prisoner Adriana, discipline. All hoped thus to coerce her into intimacy or to send her to the punishment cell. But Adriana was also far from stupid. The colony had quickly taught her to keep her eyes open and not to let those who wanted to take advantage of what little Adriana still had left of her free life. In the 3 years she spent in prison, Miranda, or Adriana as almost everyone from her parents to friends to acquaintances called her, matured very quickly. Life behind barbed wire in some ways made the girl wiser, and at the same time taught her almost Christian humility. Not so long ago, just before her release, Adriana turned 24, but she felt as if she had lived her whole life behind bars. In the end, the fate of the fat guard was decided by chance. One day, a special squad of fighters and internal security officers raided the colony. That's when it turned out that in addition to an unhealthy love for young prisoners, James had much more serious sins. It turned out that for a long time he had been working for a major criminal authority held in another prison. This authority managed to establish a very profitable business within the walls of the colony, supplied prisoners illegal substances, as well as deliver to them illegal, in local places, cell phones, so that women could contact the outside world, or, on the contrary, fool simple-minded citizens, turning all the known schemes of fraud. The most interesting thing was that James organized his dirty deeds with the help of the head of the colony, so that in the end they were taken away from there together, in the same service truck. After that, Adriana was able to breathe a little freer. A couple of days later, they were introduced to the new head of the colony, Michael, thanks to whom the girl's life during the rest of the term became a little easier. The fact that Adriana was a nurse by the nature of her professional activity. The new owner of the prison suffered from a rare disease in which injections had to be given every day. Against this background, she and the prisoner met, and Charles turned out to be an extremely decent man. He was in his early 60s. He never molested the girl. On the contrary, he treated her with due understanding and even sympathized with her difficult fate. Miranda, according to your file, you worked as a nurse in the past, right? Isn't that right? Michael asked her once, summoning her individually to his office. That's right, Chief. Adriana answered in a practiced tone, but she was a little out of breath. What would the new commander demand of her? Charles looked carefully at the girl, and then suddenly for her, embarrassedly lowered his gaze. Adriana, I have a favor to ask of you. The man began. Adriana felt her feet grow cold. Don't get me wrong. He continued in a slightly agitated voice. You see, I've suffered from a rare form of gout all my life. With my diagnosis, I have to inject myself with the drug every single day. You know, in this line of work, that's a little difficult, considering what chatty types the doctors here are, even after this James thing. Anyway, I can't give myself an injection, and the local nurse, Clara, is sticking a needle in my soft spot like she's cutting a pig in her village. For God's sake! Adriana could hardly contain her relief and laughter, and she thought she was going to be harassed again with some vulgar nonsense. And here she was. "Yes, I've heard that Clara has a heavy hand," she said with a slight smile. "But she's a professional of the highest caliber, having worked in the village paramedic station for 5 years. The girl tried to stand up for her colleague. It's obvious that she worked in the township. Michael nodded. "In general, I need a nurse who will give me medicines normally and will not talk about anything in front of strangers. Somehow, I think you, Miranda, are the best person for this role. I have read the circumstances of your story and realize you are here more out of your own stupidity and naivety than for an actual crime. I'm not going to offer you anything illegal or indecent, just a purely medical request." The girl lowered her gaze in embarrassment, her cheeks covered with an embarrassed blush. "Of course, sir," the head of the colony. "I will do whatever it takes from me to ensure your health. After all, it is my profession. No need for that." The man waved his hand at her. Michael hesitated for a moment and then said, looking out the window, "I heard how that James was mocking you here. It's all right, Miranda. He's going to have to experience all the delights of the socializing he forced on himself and the other girls. He'll answer for everything, you bastard." Adriana hesitantly raised her eyes to the colony chief, then spoke briefly. "Adriana." "What?" Michael didn't understand. "Call me Adriana. Everyone does that," the girl explained, smiling. Charles smiled warmly and paternally at the young prisoner. Since that day, Adriana was able to realize at least some of her medical potential, which, however, was very dissatisfied with the staff nurse Clara and to feel not so useless as it was before. The girl gave injections to the head of the colony and kept silent, keeping the details of their conversations in those sensitive moments under a complete ban. Michael was a widower who had lost his entire family in a plane crash, including his young 16-year-old daughter Kelly, whom he missed dearly. Perhaps Adriana reminded him of his untimely departed daughter. The girl did not know exactly, but Charles was kind to her, and in due time, when the order of general amnesty was announced, in time to hustle, providing Adriana the opportunity to get out early in the same year. In addition, Michael wrote to one of his old acquaintances, the owner of an Apasian cafe in the center of the city, and he took Adriana in as a cleaner after her release. The girl needed the job very much, so Adriana never tired of thanking the head of the colony, promising that she would definitely write him a letter after she settled down on the outside. Come on, really. I'd be glad to help you get a job as a nurse, but with your article, you can't. Not for the next couple years anyway." "That's okay," the young woman answered him. "You've already done so much for me. I'd, on the contrary, feel uncomfortable that you vouch for me both to the state and to the director of this cafe. Mason is a good man, calm. You cannot be afraid of him." Michael assured her. He and I ate a lot of salt together in his time in the service. But he decided to go into business, and Charles waved his hands eloquently. "Looking after this henhouse, as you see." He laughed unkindly. "But nothing in such work, as they say, is also necessary." Charles and Adriana parted very well, even hugging each other goodbye. The girl had never thought that she would miss the head of the colony, but she did. Deep down, Adriana was still very kind and romantic. She was just unlucky to get into a bad situation and pay with her own years of life for someone else's sins. When Adriana was 21 years old and she had just got a job in a good private clinic as a nurse, a young and promising surgeon who worked in the same medical center began to show interest in her. Eracli, that was the name of this young guy, was tall, good-looking, and very charming. He had recently turned 26, and he was considered a real star of the clinic at that time. Of course, the young nurse was flattered by the attention of such a spectacular young man, as Eracli was, and a very stormy romance quickly began between them. Before Adriana knew it, they had gone from carefree conversations over coffee in the residence room to long and beautiful dates under the full moon. Then life seemed truly magical and filled with that special magic and beauty that people see only when they are in love and experiencing the joy of reciprocal feelings. Eracli did have romantic feelings for the girl at first. At some point he even decided to tell her parents about it and was determined to marry Adriana. But then, everything suddenly went wrong. The guy became addicted to gambling, especially cards, and began to lose larger and larger sums of money. Of course, the bride, seeing all this and the prospect to which her lover was inevitably approaching, tried to somehow talk to him to reason, but all was in vain. Eracli, you should finally understand. Adriana tried to inspire the guy when he once again was going to go with friends to the underground parties, where it was supposed to be a big card tournament with the best players from all over the state. Those cards won't do you any good. I mean, look how many people's lives are literally ruined by this stuff. And you, by the way, are a surgeon. You need to always stay with a sober head and a cold heart. You are saving people's lives, and there will probably be booze, and maybe something even worse. The guy smiled indulgently in response, hugging his beloved by the shoulders. You always dramatize everything. What maimed lives? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? This is a normal professional poker tournament, the same as a normal sport, you know? Like chess. There's a regional swimming competition, a regional running competition. I don't know, so here it's a regional card game tournament. And then it's fair. If I can hold out and beat everybody, I win so much money. You always wanted the most beautiful wedding, remember? Eracli jabbed into the girl's hair and kissed her tenderly. Yes, but Adriana tried to object. But here, the groom interrupted her. You and I will play such a wedding. Such a holiday will be organized on their own means that even my parents will remember later. How it is, they refused to help their son, who was a loser, and he instead of it, the best day in their lives, managed to organize. They refused to help their son because he spends all his earnings on whiskey and poker. Adriana grumbled, trying to get out from under her fiancé's arm. I don't approve of it anyway, Eracli. They must be professional cheats, and you're going in there as if nothing had happened, like a rabbit to a boa constrictor. A shadow of impatience and irritation ran across her lover's face. He was clearly unpleasant to this conversation, and therefore the young man tried to end it as quickly as possible. Everyone closed the subject. It's annoying, for God's sake. He threw his friend over his shoulder, at the same time throwing on an expensive Italian jacket made of fine leather. Eracli was a well-to-do guy and could afford to buy such things. You're itching like my grandmother, honestly. She also tried to raise me to be a proper boy, but I'm a grown man and I won't let women push me around, understand? I'm going to the poker game. I'll be late. Go to bed without me. Having said so, Eracli picked up his gloves and a small leather bag and then disappeared through the doorway, leaving Adriana all alone in the empty apartment. They then decided to try to live together before the wedding, and rented with their own money a small apartment, which at that time had almost no belongings. The girl, not thinking long, went that evening to her home, where she was waiting for her loving father and mother, to whom she could tell absolutely everything. How could it be, my daughter? Nancy was surprised at her daughter's story. He's an addict, isn't he? How are you going to live with him when he's already losing all his money? He's gonna screw you over too. But I loved him very much, Mom. Objected to this daughter. Besides, Irakli says that cards are also a kind of sport. So I've come to consult him. What should I do now? He says that he wants to earn money for our wedding, but I still have doubts. When he talks about his poker, his eyes light up weirdly. He's obsessed with cards. You're Irakli. That's why his eyes light up, said Benjamin Vitalievich, driving out to his daughter from the next room in his wheelchair. Exactly like Pushkin's, remember? 3-7 ace. The man made deliberately scary eyes and laughed good-naturedly. He loved his daughter very much. Don't mention the Queen of Spades in vain, Benjamin, please, Adriana's mother begged. The girl came to us for advice, and you're always joking. No, where am I? I've already made up my mind. Father said guiltily, pointing at his immobile legs. I just want to say something, Adriana. You don't need a fiancé who, except for his poker, can't see anything further than his own nose. He's a surgeon, cutting people up. Daddy, Adriana exclaimed reproachfully. Well, what did I say? You did. He calmly objected, raising his hand. After all, the lives of other people depend on his hands. And what will he do if all his thoughts, instead of surgery, will become twists and turns and card combinations? What will he cure? To this, their daughter had nothing to say. She only sighed sadly. That's what I'm telling him, Dad. To do such a job every day, to take such responsibility, and in the evening to go to these underground competitions. His hands are already starting to shake during surgery. A nurse told me she assisted him the other day. She said, do you have any idea what that might be about? I mean, you guys are kind of like bride and groom now. Well, what did you say? The mother asked worriedly. What would I say? If the hospital finds out that he is a gambler, he will be fired immediately. No one will understand whether it's a sport or not. I realize that myself. If you understand it, tell your senior before it's too late. Benjamin's advice. This is not a joke, Miranda. This is getting very serious. Adriana could not answer her father that she could never betray Irakli. After all, they were only going to be married in 6 months. How could she destroy their future happiness with her own hands? But happiness? Considering what their daily routine was beginning to turn into, where Adriana just waited for her fiancé to come home late, while he got drunk and lost all their already small money in cards. In the end, just as the nurse's father had said, things did indeed end badly. Except not for Irakli, but for Adriana. It so happened that the girl's fiancé made a lot of card debts, and to pay them off, he began to slowly pull up special drugs from the group to be accounted for. Selling potent drugs to fans of a quick high, the young man received money for them, some of which went to pay debts, and part of which went to new bets. Naturally, it was not possible to keep such a disappearance secret for a long time. And in a couple of weeks, the cash register was questioned by the director of the clinic. Adriana was on shift every time when the next batch of medicines disappeared, and she alone had the key to the box with them. The girl didn't even suspect that Iraklius, talking to her, stealing the key from her, and taking another package for himself. It seemed that he deliberately framed the girl, but was able to justify his behavior, allegedly caring about their future together. I can't believe this. You took the keys to the box from me without my knowledge. Adriana was indignant. You call that trust? Irakli, how could you? Calm down. Irakli grabbed the girl's hands and immediately licked his lips, dry from excitement. The surgeon's eyes ran back and forth. He tried not to look at his beloved. Noticing how pale the young man's skin was, Adriana couldn't help but ask, "Heraclius, have you been taking something? You are so pale, and your behavior is strange. Shut up!" He bellowed at her, but immediately began to apologize. I'm sorry, dear Adriana. Just hear me out now, okay? I did everything just so that we could have our own money, and for the wedding, and in general, so that we wouldn't depend on our parents for anything. But stealing expensive drugs, even illegal ones, is not the way." Adriana could barely keep herself from screaming in fear. "Do you have any idea what they'll do to you when they find out? Not only will you lose your job, but you'll go to jail." With difficulty, the nurse finished. At that moment, on the lips of her fiancé, a wicked smile played on his lips. Heracles could hardly keep the focus of his attention on Adriana. The girl realized that her lover was under the influence of some intoxicating substance. "What have you done?" she said slowly. "Adriana, listen to me." The groom began confusedly. "You must now go to the director of the clinic and confess to him that it was you who took those drugs. Do you understand?" "What? Are you out of your mind?" Adriana's eyes instantly widened in horror. "Do you realize what you're offering me right now?" The surgeon nodded confidently in response. "Adriana, understand. It's the best thing to do, the best thing for everyone." "For whom for everyone?" "For you." Almost crying, his fiancée asked him, "Don't you understand, silly? I can't go to prison." Belittling, looked at her Heracles. "I have parents with a reputation, a career after all. I care about our future." "You're lying. You care about yourself, Heracles, and no one else." Swallowing tears, Adriana said, "I can't believe that I could trust you so much." In response, the surgeon hugged the girl, despite her attempts to pull away, and held his bride tightly to himself. "I love you, Adriana. I'll wait until you get out of jail. I won't go anywhere. And then we'll get married right away." "How's that for a plan? You're just a nurse. What are they going to do to you? My future will be ruined, and then I won't be able to provide for us. You'll serve another year, and then you'll get a job as a nurse. You won't have to work at all for a few years. I'll marry you, and you'll give birth to children at once. We'll bring them up, and no one will ever know about it." Adriana began to have doubts. Maybe she really should have taken all the blame? If Heracles was right, she would lose much less than he did. But when the girl is released, a married, quiet life immediately awaits her. "What about your poker? What about your Dan cards, because of which you're setting me up like this?" Adriana looked resolutely into Heracles' eyes, expecting to hear the truth. The young man slowly pulled away from Adriana and said deliberately without looking her in the eyes, "Poker? What about poker?" "I'll give it up. I've already given it up. There will be no more cards, and I will not come close to them. I just about paid off the bosses who sponsored me in the tournament. To hell with that. Just confess everything for God's sake." Surgeon suddenly for the girl fell to his knees in front of her, and almost crying, began to assure her of his endless love for her. "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you." Practically sobbing surgeon, hugging the bride's knees. "As you go out, so we'll sign, I swear to you, whatever you want." In the end, he still managed to persuade the gullible girl to take the crime on himself, promising her a wedding and a wonderful new life in another city. Adriana, exhausted by the variety of feelings, out of naivety, and because she still loved her, to Miranda's amazement, the court sentenced her to 5 years for stealing and distributing illegal drugs. Heracles, who was present at the trial, silently thanked Adriana with one eye. At the same time, Nancy and her husband nearly had a heart attack. The mother sobbed, blaming the groom, and lamented about the future of her innocently ruined daughter. Adriana's father, however, did not utter a single word during the entire trial, beyond what was required of him as a witness. He steadfastly endured his daughter's arrest, and only then, a month later, when Adriana was already in the colony, her mother wrote her that Benjamin was very seriously ill. His condition worsened due to the stress suffered during the investigation of the girl. So now the doctors are not going to make any prognosis about him. Everything will depend on you. The doctor spread his hands. If you can get expensive Swiss drugs for the father, then there is still a chance that he can be returned to the previous level of health. If not, alas, we have done all we can. It was worth giving Heraclius credit. During the whole time Adriana was serving his sentence, the young man wrote her several big touching letters instead of him, and even came to visit her 3 times. However, when released, the girl faced the first unpleasant behavior of her fiancé. He did not meet her from the colony. Adriana strictly forbade her parents to meet her, saying that I would take a cab myself. The girl did not want her father and mother to see the state in which she was leaving the prison, and how the heavy iron gates with barbed wire closed behind her. But she still hoped for Heracles' help, and there was nothing. Strange, Adriana thought, and hurriedly dialed the number of her beloved on her cell phone. It had been returned to her with her things, and Nancy had carefully put a couple of dollars into the phone's account so that her daughter could call when she was free and warn them that she was on her way home. However, only long beeps were heard in the receiver. After a few minutes of unsuccessful calls, the girl waved goodbye and ordered a cab and went straight home. She thought that Heracles must be busy, is on surgery, or solving some important issues at a meeting at the clinic. The young man confessed that as soon as he finally stopped playing cards, his life began to rapidly return to its former successful course. So she only had to leave the walls of the prison, as they would be together again. Trusting her fiancé, the girl decided not to bother him for a while. Especially, he would probably have her number highlighted, and he himself would call her back as soon as he was free. Thinking about the latter, Adriana smiled involuntarily, but the smile was bitter and faded. Freedom. He was free all this time, but I wasn't. I could have answered sooner. With a slight resentment, thought the girl, then switched to thoughts of her own family. At home she was welcomed warmly and lovingly. Her mother baked hot puffed pies with cheese and herbs. Adriana had loved them since childhood. Her father lay in his room and was practically unresponsive. Speaking of it, Nancy involuntarily brushed away a tear. He was like that almost as soon as you were taken away. Wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, the woman said, "The doctors say his stroke has had complications, complete paralysis of the body. He can still be restored to his former state, but the drugs they prescribed for him are very expensive. They have to be ordered from Switzerland." Adriana carefully put her palm on her father's dry hand. "Nothing, Mammy. We'll manage somehow," her daughter promised her. "A very good man helped me here in the colony. They took me to work in a cafe, but only as a cleaner, but everything is better than nothing." Nancy, sobbing with happiness that her daughter was home at last, put her head on her shoulder. "I don't care what you do. The main thing is that you came home safe and sound. God, I wouldn't wish that on an enemy. Although your Heracles is a real scoundrel. You don't have to explain anything to me. Do you think your father, and I didn't realize who really stole those drugs? Your Heraclius was still smiling in the courtroom as if he had to. Damn him to hell, Mom," Adriana said reproachfully. "It was so necessary then. Now he's waiting for me, I'm sure." The mother looked in amazement into her daughter's green eyes. What? Nancy couldn't believe her ears. And you mean to tell me that after everything he's done to you, you still believe him? The girl lowered her eyes in a flash. It was hard for her to explain to her mother how strong her feelings for the surgeon were. Words can't explain it, Mom. Adriana said quietly at last. We're connected, you know? Probably for life. Nancy looked at her daughter in silence and then cautiously said, Daughter, I've been a librarian for 30 years, and I can tell you with certainty that no work in which the protagonist thought the same way as you never ended with a happy ending. Adriana smiled instead of answering. I'll get settled in the city, get a job, and I'll try to get a loan for my father's treatment. Maybe if I'm approved, we'll be able to get my father back to normal. You just do not worry, Mommy. Everything will work out for sure. Adriana changed the unpleasant subject. And now she was walking along the Spring Avenue, heading towards the big, beautiful building of the Invest Bank, where she wanted to try her luck with the loan money. A little over a month had passed since her return. During this time, she had managed to get a job as a cleaner in the cafe where the head of the colony had sent her, and even to prove herself on the good side. The girl had performed her duties with diligence, for which the director, a broad-shouldered man of Oriental appearance, named Mason, had given her a small bonus. The only thing that constantly depressed the girl was the lack of feedback from her fiancé. Ironically, though he picked up the phone afterwards, he was not eager to see his liberated bride. The young man constantly referred to his busy schedule and the large number of patients he had to deal with all the time. Adriana, though she sensed the unkindness in his voice, continued to convince herself that all her thoughts about Irakli's dishonesty were just speculation and shards of the paranoia that had developed in her, to some extent, during her time in prison. The girl entered the spacious premises of the bank, having clarified from the guard where she had to queue up to apply for a loan. Adriana waited patiently. After standing in a long queue and giving the bank employee all the necessary documents for consideration, Adriana remained standing at the office, again waiting for the decision of her question. After a few minutes, the bank employee came out and quietly asked Adriana to follow her straight to the director's office. There Adriana saw a large, balding man holding a folder with the papers she needed to apply for a loan. Here, Robert. Annoyingly, said the girl, a bank employee, nervously adjusting her bright yellow, uniform silk scarf. I brought her in as you asked. Can I go now? Adriana thought she heard genuine fear in the girl's voice. Go, Lara. With a nod, the headmaster gave permission. And remember for the future, this kind of clients should either come straight to me, or if things are really bad, straight to the police. Lara lowered her head and slowly backed out of the office, giving Adriana a sympathetic look. At the same second, Adriana realized that nothing good was waiting for her in this bank. Well, young lady, what is your business here? With irony in his voice, the director began. He seemed to mock the girl, and she perfectly understood this information from his tone. I would like to take a loan for personal purposes. As confidently and calmly as possible, Adriana answered the banker. The man, in his turn, folded his fingers on the table and raised his eyebrows and scrutinized the girl's figure. I'm sorry, did I say something wrong? Miranda said impatiently. Though she needed money, she did not intend to endure another humiliation from someone who reveled in his small portion of power. The banker only clicked his tongue instead of answering. She wants a loan. How daring the ex-convicts are nowadays. Why are you talking to me like that? Adriana wondered. Because I want to, and because that's the only way to talk to you. The headmaster answered her unhesitatingly. When did you quit? A month ago? I saw your early release certificate. Do you really think that our bank will give you a loan with open arms, and for such a large amount of money?" Adriana felt her cheeks blush and her eyes moisten with tears of indignation. "But I brought all the necessary documents. My father is very sick, understand? He won't survive if he doesn't get these medicines. My dad, he's an advanced production worker, got injured at the factory, tightened the machine. He's been in a wheelchair ever since. Not so long ago he had a relapse, and he completely lost the ability to move, and if not for me, no one will help him. Please, please." But Robert was as relentless as a rock in the middle of an icy sea. "You tell beautiful tales, girl, but I've told enough of them in this life. They come, take out loans, and then have nothing to pay back. God only knows what you spend your money on. But I don't intend to cause any more losses to my bank. No, please, we've been there, we know. But I'll pay you back honestly." Adriana insisted with all her might. "You can see, I have a certificate of employment, everything according to the law." "Of course you do. Pleading lady? What else could a criminal who'd been out of prison a few weeks? I'd be surprised, Miranda, if you suddenly found yourself a top manager, for example. That would be extremely, by the way, positive for your ability to pay." Adriana wiped her tear-wet cheeks and lowered her eyes. She had already realized that she had been summoned here solely for the amusement of the headmaster, and no amount of pleading would soften the heart of this miser. "Go, and you'd better not come back here ever again. Unless you want to go back to jail next time." The businessman warned the girl, after which the former prisoner left his office crying. Walking back into the hall, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts, Adriana suddenly heard behind her back a woman's screams, first quietly and then louder and louder. After all, she couldn't pass by without finding out what was going on. Her voice at that moment sounded unusual, firm, and confident, and she herself could not explain how she managed to overcome her own inner barriers and shyness. She knew only one thing: she had to save this man without fail. There was the sound of keys. Someone was calling for an ambulance. Adriana, meanwhile, threw off her old coat from her shoulders and put it under the man's head. After that, the girl began to give the old man indirect heart massage, not forgetting to count to 30, pressing on his chest every time she said the next count. Interspersing her actions with artificial respiration, Adriana was able to achieve that the patient first issued a squeezed, almost indistinguishable sigh, and then his chest began to rise and fall much more confidently. The man coughed loudly, and at that moment, near the bank building, the sirens of an ambulance sounded. "Thank God!" Adriana exhaled, running her hand through her loose hair. "We made it." A few minutes later, the medical professionals were on the scene. When the elderly stranger had already been loaded onto a stretcher and transported to the ambulance, Adriana was suddenly approached by one of the doctors. A young guy about her age sincerely praised the girl and thanked her for the highly qualified help rendered to the old man. "You did well," he said cheerfully. "If it were not for the way you pumped him out, the old man would be already in the other world." The medic looked up expressively. "Now he's in a coma, but we'll connect him to a ventilator, pump what you need, and I'm sure he'll come to his senses quickly." "Thank God, he's a sturdy pensioner." Adriana looked down in embarrassment. She realized that she hadn't done anything special. She was just doing her job. After all, medicine had always been her calling, and she had been happy to help people when she worked at the local clinic. You should be proud of yourselves," the young medic encouraged the girl. "By your actions, saved a man's life. That's worth a lot nowadays." Adriana smiled and mentally wished the elderly man all the best and a speedy recovery and left the bank. Upon returning home, the young nurse immediately realized that something was wrong. Nancy sat silently on the bed, and there was not a speck of blood in her face. Father was not in the room either. "Mother, what has happened?" Rushed to the woman the girl. "Where is Daddy? Why are you so pale?" Instead of answering, the woman let out a wistful sob. "Daddy was taken to the hospital this afternoon while you went to the bank," she explained. "They said his health was very bad. God, what are we going to do now?" Without hiding her emotions, Nancy burst into tears. Adriana felt immensely guilty about what had happened to her father and the fact that she could not get money for his treatment. "Daughter." Sobbing between fits of sobs, Nancy asked her daughter, "Adriana, have you been approved for a loan?" There was such an overwhelming plea in her mother's eyes that Adriana couldn't lie to her. "No, they said their bank doesn't give money to ex-convicts. New Christie." Nancy replied, then hugged her daughter affectionately. "It's okay, we'll be fine." She tried to reassure herself and Adriana. "We've gotten out of worse than this, haven't we, honey?" "Of course we have." The girl nodded in response, and then it suddenly hit her. "Mom, I'm going to Irakli. Are you crazy?" Her mother complained once again. "Why do you need him, Adriana?" "That bastard even stopped answering your phone calls. He just couldn't be bothered with me." The nurse dismissed it. "His parents have a lot of money. They'll help us, I'm sure. I'll go straight to him and tell him everything. He'll understand." Nancy only shook her head sadly. Daughter, life teaches you nothing." Adriana, with a decisive step, headed towards Irakli's house. She was sure that the young surgeon would help her and her family. After all, he had promised to marry her as soon as she was released. Nevertheless, for the last few days he really did not pick up the phone at all, and it involuntarily led Miranda to agonizing thoughts about their relationship. Yes, she and Irakli were indeed, as they called it, from different worlds. The surgeon's parents were wealthy businessmen involved in timber sales to the north. Rumor had it that they had several dozen $1 million in their accounts. Adriana's parents, on the other hand, could never boast of anything like that. Her mother, Nancy, worked all her life as a librarian in the city's central church, and her father, Benjamin, spent most of his working years in the pulp mill, where he had a really fatal accident that left the man disabled for life. Now truly cosmic money was needed to treat his father. Irakli remained her last, almost ghostly hope. Did the difference in their social status with Irakli interfere with her feelings? Adriana thought not. At least she had once thought so. And now, was her fiancé so busy that he couldn't even find a couple hours in his tight schedule to meet her at the colony gate? The girl was tired of the endless questions and wanted only one thing right now, to find out the truth. On the way to her fiancé's house, Adriana involuntarily recalled the moment when she had first met Irakli's parents. He had invited her to their country house for a festive dinner. Vanessa, his mother, had prepared in advance for the guests' arrival, ordering the best dishes from her favorite restaurant. She herself did not like cooking and did not know how to cook. Christopher, Adriana's father, was looking forward to seeing the bride of his only son, and therefore even helped his wife to set the table. Unfortunately, the girl did not live up to their hopes. Seeing on the doorstep of a pretty shade, in a simple chintz dress in a flower, and in cheap shoes, Vanessa was in mute amazement. This was not the kind of choice she had expected her son to make. "Miranda?" In a patronizing tone, she asked, clarifying if this shepherdess was indeed her Irakli's girlfriend. "Are you really Miranda, my son's friend?" "Yes," Miranda answered, embarrassed, and immediately lowered her gaze. but to be honest, she was a little afraid of the tall, statuesque woman who was her fiancé's mother. "Good afternoon. Nice to meet you." Miranda couldn't find anything else to say to such a dazzling lady. Vanessa, in whose ears and on whose fingers sparkled large earrings and diamond rings, only with a superior gesture invited her inside. At the same moment, Irakli himself appeared from the depths of the house. He, too, was clearly embarrassed by his mother's behavior, so he tried to make a joke to somehow diffuse the situation. However, it did not save the evening. During the whole dinner, the woman did not utter 2 words, only studied the other half of her son with a contemptuous look. Apparently, the same opinion was held by his father, because when Irakli escorted Miranda and personally put her in a cab, the guy was immediately criticized by his parents. "Who the hell is Miranda?" "Huh, son," Vanessa wailed. "Couldn't you find someone better? She's as poor as a church mouse. We don't need a daughter-in-law like that. My God, she's even got leatherette shoes. I'm sorry, son, but I agree with my mother." Christopher stepped in. "We have a house, if I may say so, noble, and we do not intend to let any poor here. Have fun, but don't let her count on more than that. She has chosen the wrong young man, a beggarly adventuress. Oh, the wrong one." Irakli, in whose head, which even then, began to creep thoughts of regular poker games, drinking and the like, just waved away. "Say, calm down, parents. We are not like that. Not serious in general." However, Adriana, he told exactly the opposite, until the passion for gambling finally absorbed him, and Irakli did not slip to shameful for a surgeon stealing, as well as framing his own favorite girl. Adriana tried to put all the bad memories out of her mind, but when she came to the house where Irakli's parents lived with their son, she couldn't believe her own eyes. Next to the elite high-rise apartment building was a wedding cottage. A white limousine literally shone from rubbed to a shine tanks and waited for the main culprits of the celebration to sit in it. The guests near the entrance were dressed very elegantly and very expensive. However, most of them, the girl recognized perfectly well. They were her colleagues at the private clinic, where she once worked together with her fiancé. In the next second, the ground literally went out from under Adriana's feet. The nurse had to grab onto the stone wall of the house to keep from falling. From the entrance, dressed in a luxurious black tuxedo, Irakli slowly came out, but not alone, but with a charming bride whose wedding dress Adriana herself could only envy. The surgeon's bride was Camille, the daughter of the director of a private clinic who came there once a year in order to ask her father for as much money as possible. Camille was a famous socialite in the city, and few people would have thought that she would have been willing to pay attention to a man like Irakli. Yes, his parents were fabulously wealthy, but still, young Irakli did not fit into the tastes of the ever-cheerful and sparkling inner energy Camille. And yet, there you are. Adriana had never expected such a betrayal from her boyfriend. Anything but not a rich beauty who could be married only because of money and position in society. Well, a shrewd move by Iraklius. Adriana said gloomily under her breath, "Now you will never have to think about the future again. Love and advice." In tears, Adriana hurried away from the house, away from her hated fiancé and his rich parents. Behind her, she could hear the cheers of the guests and the laughter of Camille. It was good that at least someone was really happy that day. The nurse thought to herself as she walked farther and farther away, unable to hold back the tears of resentment and betrayal that flowed down her cheeks. Passers-by looked at her with sincere surprise and incomprehension. How could this pretty girl go crying on such a beautiful sunny day? What is in her heart? Did she need any help? But Adriana tried not to look around. She kept her gaze fixed on her feet and kept walking forward and forward, completely unaware of where and why she was going. But most importantly, how could she save her father when the last and faintest hope was lost to her forever? Being in upset feelings, Adriana did not immediately pay attention to a large black business class car stopped just a few meters away from her. A foreign car of the latest model, it attracted the gazes of passers-by. After all, not every day they could see on the gray roads of their city such a miracle of automobile construction. Out of the car came out an athletic-looking, trim, broad-shouldered man, about 35 years old. With an easy gait, the stranger approached Adriana, waving his hand in a friendly manner. In an effort to attract the girl's attention, the young driver of the foreign car smiled broadly, revealing 2 rows of impeccably straight and snow-white teeth. "Hello," he greeted her cheerfully. "Why, is she so beautiful and crying?" Adriana looked at the tall, handsome man in total confusion. She did not understand what he wanted from her. "Hello," she said slowly. "I'm not crying at all, just a speck in my eye." Adriana didn't want to go into details about her condition in front of a stranger. "Who are you?" The man happily extended his broad palm to her. "My name is John. I work as a security guard for a very respectable man whom you saved the other day. He came out of his coma today, and the first thing he asked me to do was to find you and bring you to him. He wants to see you, Miranda. Right, that's your name, isn't it?" "Adriana," the nurse corrected him. "But I still don't understand what this is about. I haven't helped anyone but—" Suddenly the girl stopped. She understood, and from her face the guard guessed that the nurse had finally realized who she had saved in the bank from a heart attack. Confusedly wiping away her tears, Adriana looked into John's face. From him came only kindness and desire to thank the girl for saving his boss. As a result, the nurse agreed to go with the guard, and in half an hour, she was taken to an elite private clinic, much larger and better than the one where Adriana herself used to work. "Wow," the girl marveled sincerely. As she and John walked through the lobby to his boss's luxurious private room. "Impressive?" Winking at her, John said cheerfully, "Christopher always stays only in suites like this when he has health problems." "Christopher?" Adriana asked. So that was the name of this mysterious elderly man. John, meanwhile, was humming softly to himself. When they stopped next to the right room, the man said in a practiced official tone, "Christopher Parker, head of the Finance Consulting Corporation, is expecting you." Adriana smiled involuntarily and then ventured into the room. There on a high soft bed sat the same elderly pensioner whom she a couple of days ago performed artificial respiration and cardiac massage. "Good afternoon." Adriana greeted him politely. "I'm glad to see that you are feeling much better. Good day to you too." The man smiled. "But by your efforts, as they say, did you recognize me, sweetheart?" With a slight smile, he asked the girl. Adriana nodded. Yes, she did. Only you were dressed differently that day, a little less stylish. She found the appropriate word looking at the elderly businessman's immaculate silk pajamas. Parker gave a short laugh in response. "Well, yes, there is such a thing. In fact, I was at work that day." "Work? I don't get it, Adriana. How's that? You were dressed like a beggar?" "Yeah, that's the point. A working scheme, you know." The man smiled with one eye. "I wanted to inspect my new subordinates, the employees at the bank I bought a couple of months ago," explained the businessman. "There was no time to pay an official visit to this place, so I was advised by a friend, also a businessman, to dress up as a poor man and see how you will be treated in that bank. This is a proven option, recognized throughout the business world, and it is in relation to the outcasts of society that the CEO can make the most accurate assessment of whether the company adheres to the chosen strategy of humanity and equality for all or not. "Excuse me, Christopher." In a voice full of sadness, Adriana said, "But most likely, the investment bank belongs to the second category." "I already guessed that," with a serious look answered Parker. "About the current director, we already have many questions. You can be sure he has already served his place in the soft chair." Adriana cautiously raised her eyes to the businessman. Does he know about her past? And about what she had to endure outside the walls of the colony? Parker continued his story as if he hadn't noticed anything. "While I was there demonstratively twisting and standing in line, unsuccessfully waiting to be noticed, I suddenly felt sick. I felt dizzy, and then my heart gave out. Right here." The businessman pointed to his chest. "But the employees of this investment company didn't give a damn about me. Can you imagine? I heard by ear, when I was already sliding down the wall, how their guard just laughed at me, saying that some vagrant had too much alcohol, so he laid down at our place, as if in a hotel room. My clothes really embarrassed those employees, but on the other hand, they had never seen me in person, so they had nothing bad on their minds. So Adriana, simple human indifference turns out." The man shook his head sadly, and then finished the story. "And you were the only one who was not shy and not afraid to give me first aid, saved me, you might say, from the stupidest death." Adriana saw a tiny tear roll down from one corner of Christopher's eye. "Then the ambulance brought me to the intensive care unit, but I don't remember it, because I was in a coma. John told me that later. He said that the doctors were surprised when after I came to my senses, the first thing I did was to throw off my gray wig, and they almost fainted." Christopher laughed, and Adriana, who did not care to laugh at all, only pretended to smile. She herself at the same time, taking advantage of the moment, imperceptibly wiped a tear from her face. "Yeah," the girl shook her head. "You scared everyone so much, Christopher." Now in front of the former prison nurse sat not an old man of retirement age, and Christopher in appearance was no more than 55, and no gray hair, of course, he was not in the past. On the contrary, he had a beautiful silky hair, light blonde color, and despite all his wrinkles, remained in a fairly fit for his age. In general, the businessman gave the impression of an extremely pleasant man, albeit with a not quite ordinary sense of humor. Adriana still could not get out of her head the deed of her former fiancé. In fact, he had embarrassed her in front of the whole town, because everyone knew that he and Miranda were to be married as soon as she was released. Now the girl could no longer not only get a job in her professional profile, but in general she was ashamed to even show her face to her former colleagues and friends. What will they say about her now, if they don't say it out loud already? For everyone, Adriana became something like an unwilling scapegoat who obediently accepted all the small and not so small sins of her immoral master, which for the girl was Heracles. Her love for him was too strong and obsessive, so much so that Adriana could not see his true attitude to her in time. And when she realized it, it was too late, and nothing could be changed. Christopher, noticing how deep Adriana was in her own thoughts, coughed embarrassedly and drew her attention back to him. Adriana stirred like a frightened doe. She hoped she hadn't said any of her involuntary musings aloud. "Forgive me," she apologized. "I'm afraid I'm just too tired from all the events of today, and so I lost the thread of our conversation. Anyway, I'm very glad you're feeling better." You'll be discharged soon, and you can go back to your normal life. You will continue to inspect your banks as a vagabond." Adriana smiled sadly, while the millionaire seemed to understand without words. "Well, that's true, of course it is, but—" The millionaire looked enigmatically at the girl sitting in front of him, and then decided to ask the question that was bothering him. "Adriana, can I ask you one more favor?" "I'll tell you right away that it will be paid generously. Don't even worry about that." Adriana looked suspiciously at her new acquaintance. "It depends on what it's about." The girl answered cautiously. Christopher calmed down a bit and continued. "You see, from time to time in life, we all have terrible and tragic things happen to us, and I, alas, was no exception." The man paused for a moment to gather his wits. "You see, my son needs special qualified help now. I guessed long ago that you didn't just help me that day at the bank. You had a doctor's reflex. I found out your background, but I don't care about that. At the end of the day, it's not what we've been through. It's whether we're still human. You, I see, weren't still or a good person, and only you can help my son to regain his faith in life." Adriana looked at the businessman with astonishment. Finally, she nodded, saying, "You may continue." "A year ago, my son and his mother were involved in a terrible car accident. My wife, to my great regret, could not be saved then, but my son was left a wheelchair-bound invalid, but he still has every chance to walk again. However, my boy has fallen into a deep depression, blames himself for the fact that that day he could not cope with the control, because of which the car was carried out on the oncoming traffic. I'm sorry." Adriana responded sympathetically, "Thank you." The millionaire nodded. "I only want you, Miranda, to help my son to learn physical therapy again. And at the same time, I want you to supervise his medication. The thing is, Ethan seems to be angry at everyone and everything, not following doctor's orders, finally giving up on himself. I understand that he's just punishing himself for what happened, but I want my son. I mean my real Ethan, not a pale shadow of him. Well, that's my offer, okay?" Adriana took her time answering, deciding to ponder Parker's proposal first. On the one hand, of course, she was a little afraid to go to the house of a stranger and take responsibility for the fate of the banker's son. But on the other hand, now her family needed money for her father's treatment more than ever, and helping people is still her main calling, which for several years spent in prison, Adriana had already managed to miss a lot. The nurse was not completely sure if she could get Ethan back on his feet, but it was definitely worth a try, especially since Christopher had promised her complete protection from the outside world and confidentiality. In other words, he'd promised that no one she knew, and especially not Irakli, would know where she was or why she was there. Good. Adriana finally agreed. "Just give me one night, please. I need to warn my mother and pack some of my things." The businessman gladly agreed and thanked the girl for such a noble deed. That same evening, Adriana told her mother about everything and promised her that in a couple of weeks she would be able to transfer the first amount of money to her card, on which she would be able to buy at least a few vital injections for their father. The mother just burst into tears of happiness and kissed her daughter on both cheeks. "Blessings, Adriana, on your good journey." The woman stayed at home, while Miranda got into Christopher's big black foreign car, and with his invariable security guard driver John, went to the millionaire's house. Ethan's acquaintance with Adriana did not go well from the start. Arriving at the luxurious Parker mansion, the girl was first of all taken to get acquainted with her future patient. However, the son Christopher flatly refused to accept the guest in his room. Not only that, the very idea of therapeutic exercise and physiotherapy the guy took as they say, in a flip. "Who did you bring to me, Dad?" Ethan asked in a frustrated tone. "Why did she come here in the first place? Didn't you realize that I don't want to hear any more about my recovery? It's impossible, you know. I'm my own boss, and I decide whether I live or rot like a plant, and I deserve only the latter." A grim-looking guy, a little older than Adriana, was sitting in a wheelchair, swearing like a 12-year-old boy. Adriana was surprised to see his messy hair and an old t-shirt with the logo of some sci-fi movie on it. For all his unwillingness to live, couldn't he at least wash himself? What kind of weird form of protest is this? Miranda thought as she unpacked her belongings in her assigned room of the mansion. The irony was that in the room next to hers lived the millionaire's son, whose dialogue with his father she had just overheard. She was not eavesdropping on purpose, but this Ethan was so loud that his cries literally shook the whole floor. "Son, calm down, please." His father tried to calm the boy down. "You at least try to get in touch with her. She is a nurse from God. She saved my life, you know, son. Maybe she can help you get out of that damn chair." But Ethan had no intention of solving the problem peacefully. "She's gonna help me? Me? Dad, are you serious? Or are you still jerking me around? Yeah, she won't even be able to pick me up if I collapse in the middle of the gym." "Then don't fall." Parker shouted at his son. "Hold on, yell, scream, whatever you want to do, but do not fall. Why am I talking to you like a little kid again, huh? Adriana stays here and tries to help you. That's my last word." The girl heard the door close behind Christopher with a loud slam. At that moment, Adriana realized the seriousness of the situation and prepared herself for the hard, monotonous work that seemed to last for a long time. Adriana was not one to give up so easily. The history with Irakli and the colony had only hardened her already combative nature. The next morning, the nurse made a schedule of medications and detailed all the steps of her sessions with Ethan. Of course, the businessman's son flatly refused to comply with the recommendations, and at every opportunity tried to get Adriana out of her mind, provoking her into a new scandal. Here, the girl put a small sheet, printed from the computer on the guy's desk. "You have to follow this daily routine and a system of exercises to ease your spine, the gradual transition back to an upright position." "What?" The guy mumbled back. "I'm not doing anything. You're wasting your time, Adriana." Ethan defiantly opened a magazine and shielded himself from the girl with it. "I'll meet you at the gym today. Class starts in 40 minutes. If you don't show up, you're on your own." Adriana answered him calmly and proudly went back to her room to practice the necessary exercises. Naturally, at the appointed time, no one showed up at Adriana's gym, and the second time, and the third time too. Then the girl decided to take Ethan on the sly, and having studied some medical literature, decided to realize what she had planned. The next morning, Ethan looked out of the window and was literally stunned to see Adriana sitting on a special yoga mat in the middle of a neatly cut and green lawn, practicing various not very complicated asanas. The nurse was dressed more than modestly, no provocatively tight tights or short shirts, only clean, light, and practical clothes, which, nevertheless, did not embarrass her smooth and graceful movements. The former prisoner's stretching skills were always good, so she could easily perform some impressive tricks that would make an ordinary person want to do the same thing after her. What about a handicapped person? "What are you doing here?" asked Ethan, who arrived half an hour later in a wheelchair. "Are you practicing yoga or something?" "Yes." Adriana answered him with a peaceful exhale. "Would you like to join me?" "Sure." Ethan answered cheerfully in the nurse's tone. There's just one little problem. I'm an invalid. Why are you poisoning me? You think I don't know what you're getting at? Do you want me to come to you, to your Dan classes?" Adriana smoothly came out of another asana and then answered Ethan in a completely indifferent manner. "I don't want anything from you. I just do yoga outdoors because I love my body and my spirit. And if a person loves his body, respects it, and does not sit all day, dirty in a wheelchair, hiding behind far-fetched complexes, then the spirit of such a person will be fine. You ask yourself first, are you normal at all? Your father does everything for you just to get you interested in life again. Not only that, you have the means to lead a full life. And you've got it in your head, like an idiot, that you're handicapped. So you cover yourself with it, spitting on yourself and everyone you care about." The guy's face was contorted with a grimace of pain and anger. "How dare you? You don't know anything about me. How can you talk about me? Get out of here. You didn't hire me, Christopher did." Adriana exhaled. "It's up to him to fire me. You'd better spend your energy on your exercises instead of wasting it like this. You might be able to do something like what I just did here later." It was Adriana's first small victory over Ethan's stubbornness. The next day, the young man was clearly reluctant and skeptical, but came to the nurse's class. However, contrary to his expectations, the girl did not praise the guy. On the contrary, she did not stop scolding him and somewhere even hurt his male pride, just to awaken his inner motivation. Eventually, it worked. Ethan started taking the medications prescribed by the doctors, following his diet, and taking care of himself again. But most importantly, he came to Adriana's classes every day. Ethan took his first independent steps with great difficulty. The untrained, relaxed body simply refused to take the load he was supposed to, and that gave Ethan terrible pains in the back and lower back. How many times he wanted to give up, and was literally ready to burn his nurse with a look, if only she would stop hurting his ego. But the effect of such training, when Ethan was, as they call it, on adrenaline, increased many times over. In a few months he could already move around the house with the help of crutches, and in another 6 months he could walk with a cane. Ethan's happiness, and especially his father's, was unparalleled. "My God, Adriana, it's just a miracle." Christopher never ceased to be amazed. Not only has he gotten out of his wheelchair, but he's been much less rude to me. I'm even afraid to ask, "What are you doing with him?" Miranda just laughed in response. "I motivate him, Christopher, and nothing more." The girl said, "He needed sporting anger, aggression, but the kind that gives him the strength to live. So I pressed him on some emotional points. Don't talk about it, Ethan, I beg you. Otherwise, I don't know how he'll behave in the future." What are you? Absolutely not." The businessman whispered conspiratorially and then crossed himself several times. "Adriana, you really have become our family's guardian angel. I never thought I would say this, but I am truly grateful to the fate that she crushed me in that bank. Otherwise, you and I would never have met. You've got a tongue." Adriana jokingly chided him. "The main thing is to live a long life and keep an eye on your condition. If anything, immediately call an ambulance with the heart jokes. Oh, how bad? Yes, I believe it." The millionaire agreed with her. In gratitude to Adriana for her help and good attitude towards his son, Christopher did everything possible to save her sick father. Benjamin was transferred to the best city clinic, where he was given the most modern treatment, to pay for which the businessman personally volunteered. Soon the condition of Adriana's father showed the first improvement. Nancy did not stop rejoicing with her daughter and thank God, but more, of course, the banker Parker, without whose help Benjamin would have been waiting for disconnection from all life support systems. All the while the girl lived in the house of a millionaire. She received from him a generous salary, most of which Adriana invariably sent to her mother. A joyful event in the life of Nancy was the purchase of a new one-bedroom apartment, in which she was going to move with her husband when he finally recovered and can again move in a wheelchair. And so it happened. A couple of years later, Benjamin's physical condition not only returned to its former level, but also significantly improved, allowing the man to really enjoy every day that passed. Now they live in a nice new home and enjoy what they have with each other, not getting tired of thanking his favorite daughter every day. And Adriana's personal life has also improved, and in the most unexpected way. The thing is, she started dating Ethan. When Christopher found out about the affair between the nurse and his son, he was very surprised. You couldn't stand her, remember? His father asked his son with a sly squint. And now then, in the brides of her, write her down. I'm not just writing her down, I'm marrying her, Dad. The boy laughed back. I really fell in love with Adriana from the first day I met her. But I didn't realize it at the time. But when I saw her in that gray sweatshirt and wide pants doing yoga, that's when it really hit me. My father only jokingly wagged his finger in response. He had long ago realized that Miranda, his son, was no better match for him. Adriana herself had been hiding her feelings for Ethan for a long time, even from herself, but eventually, after the boy had gotten back on his feet, there was no need to play the feud anymore, and they began to be friends openly and then moved to a more romantic level of their relationship. For the first time in her life, Adriana was 100% sure that Ethan, who blew the dust off her and made her incredibly happy, would never betray her for anything in the world. Her parents agreed with this opinion. So when the Young announced to them about their imminent wedding, Nancy and her husband only rejoiced for their daughter. Here, they said, Adriana finally met a worthy man. The girl herself retrained as a teacher of physical therapy and began to lead groups of therapeutic gymnastics and physical training, where she helped people recover from serious injuries and maintain their health even in the presence of chronic diseases. Ethan was incredibly proud of his young wife. More soulful and understanding subtle person he never dreamed of seeing next to him. 2 years later, Adriana gave birth to 2 adorable twin girls named Emily and Cindy. Needless to say, how happy their father was when he learned that he had 2 beautiful daughters. Ethan, by this time, had already established himself in the financial market as a successful young businessman worthy to continue his father's business. Christopher gave in his management, the very investment bank which began their acquaintance with Adriana, and the young banker began to manage it quite well. One day, when Adriana arrived at her husband's office, accompanied by a baby carriage, Ethan quietly led her into his office and silently pointed to the CCTV cameras installed in the HR department. "Do you recognize it?" he asked, looking at his wife. Adriana didn't understand what he meant at first, but after a closer look, she felt a chill run down her spine. Her ex-fiancé, Irakli, was sitting in the personnel department, his head sullenly drooping. It was obvious that the man had given up a lot in recent years. I checked him through my channels. The young businessman told his wife. He's completely drunk, lost everything he had in illegal poker clubs. That's why his wife and kid left him, and his rich parents disowned him. So Irakli was left all alone in this world. There is still justice on this earth. What is he doing here? Slowly asked his wife, Adriana. He came to apply for a job with us. Ethan answered nonchalantly. He wants to try his hand at being a guard. Do you think we should give this man a second chance? Ethan had long known about his wife's past, including Irakli's betrayal, but he had never judged her. On the contrary, he sympathized with her and dreamed of personally punching the bastard in the face. And now Ethan offered his wife to do with this scoundrel whatever she deemed necessary. "If you want, I'll go out there right now and beat him up so he won't be in this town for another year. But for you and everything he's done to you." Adriana shook her head negatively. "You shouldn't. Look at him. I think life has punished him enough already. Let's not add to his misery, shall we? Get him a job, not as a security guard, but as a janitor. Let him work in the fresh air like I used to. Besides, that way he can't steal anything from the office and then gamble it away. Whatever you say." Ethan nodded, then turned off the camera monitor. "I'll try to get off early tonight. Shall we go to a restaurant?" "I'd love to." Adriana responded, then sent a kiss to her husband and pointed to the stroller. "I'll let my mom know we're going out tonight so she can watch the girls." Going outside, Adriana tried to get into the car as inconspicuously as possible, having put the children inside and fastened them securely in the small, brightly colored car seats. She did it just in time. As soon as she slammed the car door shut, Irakli's figure emerged from the bank building. Fortunately, he couldn't see her from behind the tinted windows of the car. Looking at the gaunt, thin figure of the man she had once loved so much that she had agreed to go to prison for his sake, Adriana felt pity for Irakli. In front of her was a man who had destroyed his own happiness and lost his own opportunities. And all this for a phantom chance to chase and beat fate. For a second, it seemed to Miranda that her ex-fiancé, by some sixth sense, caught her presence in the neatly tinted foreign car. Iraklius looked at Adriana's car for several long moments, literally devouring with his gaze the one who, according to his assumption, could be inside behind the wheel. Had he guessed that Adriana was the one inside? The woman didn't want to know the answer to that question. Instead, the words her father had once spoken rang clearly in her mind. "He's possessed. That's why his eyes are burning." 3-7 Ace.